Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. There are 3 seasons that locals are wondering about how active they will get: basketball, football, and hurricane. The latter, unfortunately, is the only one of the 3 that cannot be postponed. We'll be looking at the score tonight, not only about the seasons, but the latest on the COVID data. We'll also examine reactions to Phase 1 restrictions, troubles at nursing homes, and tourism's deep slump. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Gordon Russell, managing editor for investigations, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate; Jeff Duncan, sports reporter, the Athletic website and WVUE TV, Channel 8; Mark SCHLEIFSTEIN, environmental reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go over to Gordon first let's get an update, really, how we're looking with COVID and the numbers. We saw that lowering of the curve. Are we keeping that trend?
Yeah, I think the numbers are fairly encouraging. You'd like to see them go to 0 or something close to it, and that hasn't happened. We've still got sort of a stubborn, you call it a plateau, and that goes for deaths and goes for new cases. But the new cases are much lower than they were at the height of this, or at least what we think was the height of it. We were having, at one point, we were having around 70 deaths in Louisiana every day, and now it's down to more like 20. And the new infection rates have also dropped dramatically. There's a little bit of, the numbers can be confusing because Orleans and Jefferson parishes have been a little further into this than the rest of the state, so you're still seeing some growth in other parts of the state, including in East Baton Rouge Parish and some other large parishes, but not at an alarming rate. But so I would say that the numbers are positive, but they're not. This thing has not been totally stamped away like it was in some other places, like in Asia. So I think. The New York Times has a useful graphic they do. I don't know if anyone here looks at it, but they show states that are, trending upwards, states that are plateauing, and states that are decreasing. And we're in the plateau state, which is what most states are. And it's not a bad place to be. You'd like to be in the group of states that's really on the serious decline. Yeah. And some of the other hard hit states are in that place, like New York and New Jersey.
So, Gordon, in terms of the areas of our state, in terms of our area and the metro area, what are, the parishes, Orleans, Jefferson, St. Tammany, St. Charles, et cetera, St. John, what are we looking like?
Well, I would say that the numbers are fairly similar. They're fairly flat in all of those parishes. And I think what we're watching for now is what's going to happen. And it's going to take a little more time to see the effects of this. What's going to happen with the easing of some of the reopening of the economy, which of course has only been in place for a week or less, depending on which parish you're in. And so I think what we're going to be watching for is whether that leads to a new spike in infections and how big of a spike might it lead to. And as you remember from the early days of this, it can take a long time for that sort of stuff to show up in the data. So it may be a couple more weeks before we really understand what that's done. And then also, since I think the reopening has been fairly cautious, it could take longer for something like that to develop, because I don't know that everybody's going out to eat in restaurants and so forth, even if some restaurants are open.
We're going to be talking about that with Errol in just a minute or two. I know one benchmark that was noted this week was hospitalizations under 1,000, and that number does seem to be going down a little bit. So, that is some encouraging news, certainly. Still too many people hospitalized with it, but encouraging.
Right. I think the message is that this thing isn't over by any means, but all the metrics that we're following are trending in a good direction, or at least a neutral direction, which is good. It could be better, but you'd like to see it gone, because as long as there are new infections happening, the possibility for a new eruption is there. But I agreed, the hospitalization figures are positive, and there's no cause for alarm at the moment, I would say.
But Gordon, the next big date is June 5th, and that would be the day where it could be possible that we could move on to phase 2. The governor seems to be fairly optimistic so far. Do you think we're heading that way?
I mean, I don't see anything right now that we should be alarmed about. Again, it would be great if the numbers would continue to go downwards instead of staying sort of stubbornly flat. But I don't see any reason to think that we shouldn't be headed towards that.
All right, Gordon, thanks. We're going to stick with Errol right now because, as you mentioned, Gordon, restaurants are starting to open in this phase one period. But how is the public responding to that? Are restaurants seeing folks coming out, or is there still a lot of caution out there? E?
Well, just from my own anecdotal personal observation, people are going out, but not in the numbers that I expected. I know like last Friday, a week ago, some of the restaurants were pretty empty. And I think there are a couple of reasons. One, not everybody knows about it. Maybe some people are still concerned. But also when you're down to only being able to use 1/4 of your capacity, there's not going to be many people in your restaurant, especially if you're in a small restaurant. But the one thing I heard, actually 3 different people at 3 different restaurants told me, is that a problem they're having is getting the service people in the restaurant, because when you only have 1/4 capacity, you're not going to make much money. You're not going to get much money in terms of tips. And so people who are drawing unemployment were better off just getting the unemployment and then coming. And so it's not like they were abandoning their restaurant, but their message was, call me back later. So some restaurants were like really scraping, getting old friends and family members and to come in and wait on tables. And so some restaurants, it was just really surprising. A few people there were. On the other hand, I went to a restaurant in the Quarter last night. It was a big restaurant, and either at 1/4 capacity, there was still a lot of people in there, and that was with doing all of the proper spacing. And so there are things. I think one thing you're seeing though is an opportunity for more outdoor dining. In Jefferson, they were first in putting out more sheltered areas with tables, using part of the parking lots. Allowing people, and even Orleans Parish agreed to it, where they're allowing more tables outside. And so, it's 1/4 inside, but outside, the rule is a lot easier. So we may have more of that in the future.
So since you've been now to some restaurants in the community, what is it like now? I mean, are the servers, they're masked, I'm assuming. Everybody has to have a mask. And, what's the feeling among people? And are tables really being spaced far enough apart?
Oh, yeah. Look, everybody's conscientious about that. And so in some cases, it's way more than the proper need. I find the idea of a masked server to be a little disorienting still. I'm not quite used to that. And I had one waiter who came and recited the whole menu. And the problem was, because of his mask, he was so muffled, we couldn't understand. But I think everybody's just being very conscientious about it.
Well, I know restaurants certainly are looking forward to having the customers there, but this has to be a bit of a problem for them. I mean, because they cannot, like you said, only have 25% capacity. Can they make money doing that?
No, but luckily there's still takeout. And remember, there was takeout about another month or so before there. And so while we were eating there at one restaurant, while there were very few people sitting at tables, there was another table that was busy handling the takeout orders. And so as of last week, the first Friday of this, takeout seemed to be dominating. But maybe by this weekend, as you get to a holiday weekend, and people are getting used to it, and people traditionally go and eat out, that they might be more inclined.
Okay, all right, E. Thanks a lot. Jeff, over to you. People are wondering, what's going to happen with our sporting events. We love our sports, basketball, football, baseball here. What can we expect?
Well, I think there's a lot of reason for optimism right now, Marcia. We've already seen a couple of major sports leagues start up. The German professional soccer league, the Bundesliga, has started. They've undergone a lot of protocols. So I think we're seeing some of these leagues that can be the forerunners for other leagues like the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the NFL in the fall. NASCAR started up last weekend with their first race in South Carolina. The PGA Tour is getting ready to start up here in a couple of weeks. And I think right now the next league that matters for local fans is going to be the NBA. We had a chance to speak with the general manager of the Pelicans, David Griffin, this week. They opened up their facility recently. They have 7 players here in the market that are practicing individually right now. No team practices, but there's a lot of optimism that they're going to restart regular season in some form or fashion. And I don't know exactly what format, how many games will be left in the regular season. That's going to be up to Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, who has said that he wants to make an announcement here in the next couple of weeks. And I think he's just buying as much time as he can and trying to get as much data as possible. The phrase he's used is we're concerned about the data, not the date. And I think that's a wise way of looking at it. But I do think sometime in July, about mid-July, we're probably going to get some form of NBA regular season finish.
Will it be an
Jeff,
abbreviated season?
Yes, I think it'll be. What they're talking about right now is maybe a 70-game regular season. If you remember, the Pelicans have played 64 games, so they would probably get 6 games in, maybe more. It could be more. I don't see them completing an 82-game regular season, and that would be bad news for the Pelicans, who are trying to claw their way back into the number 8 playoff spot. They're 3.5 games back, so the more games they have to work with there, the better.
But Jeff, it seems like they're talking about all of the games being in Orlando. Is that correct? So there won't be games here at the Smoothie King Center.
No, I don't think so. It sounds like what they're going to do is play either all the games in Orlando or maybe split between Orlando and Las Vegas, and you'd have all the Western Conference teams on the West Coast playing in Vegas, maybe all the teams on the Eastern Seaboard and in the South playing in Orlando. They want to limit travel, understandably, as much as possible. And these bubble cities, Orlando right now is definitely going to be one of them, it sounds like. The Disney World complex, if you've ever been down there, it's a massive, almost convention center-like of sports. They have multiple basketball courts. They have lots of available hotel inventory. So it would be perfect setup to get a number of NBA teams in there to play, say, over a 2-week period, finish out the regular season. But there's just so many unanswered questions about the protocols and how you can still, play a basketball game under this condition. But it doesn't sound like we're going to see any fans at any of the games, even in the postseason.
What about football?
Well, I think football is in as good a shape as you could be because of their timeline. They don't start till the fall. All these other leagues, Major League Baseball is looking at maybe a 4th of July opening date. So these other leagues will have gone through the process. They will have established protocols. I think the NFL will have determined what works, what doesn't work. And by that time, there should be a lot more testing being done. They feel like, talking to some of the people with the Pelicans and Saints, that by the time the football season rolls around, they should have greater access to testing. Right now, the Pelicans, the NBA, they're not testing, they're just screening. So when you come into the facility out on Airline Drive, you're getting tested for your screen for your temperature. You're answering some questions on a survey, but you're not actually taking a test unless you show symptoms, and then you would get a test. And I think they feel like by that time there'll be some advances that could allow them to play football. I don't think, though, we'll see preseason games. I'll be surprised if we see those in the NFL.
Any spectators?
I doubt it. There's been some proposals floated. The Miami Dolphins have figured out that they could get 25% of their stadium, but I think at this point it's way too early to tell.
Okay, well, we'll see how it goes. I mean, everybody certainly is anxious for their sports. So you feel encouraged that we will be seeing something?
Yeah, I'll be surprised. I think the best way to look at it, Marcia, is I'm confident we're going to see a start of sports. I'm less confident that we might finish some of these seasons, because I fear there could be another outbreak or another peak, and it could cause them to call it off at the mid-season or so.
Well, basically, we just have to roll with the punches right now, don't we? That's about all we can do. See how it goes.
Sounds that way.
And try to stay healthy. Okay, Jeff, thanks a lot. Mark, over to you. Okay, COVID, we've been dealing with that, and that's a whole lot to deal with. But now we are knocking on the door of the hurricane season, and it's going to be an active one, above normal.
It is indeed. We're the National Weather Service, National Hurricane Center, NOAA, this week basically has predicted that there's going to be 13 to 19 named storms. 6 to 10 of those will be hurricanes, and 3 to 6 of those will be major hurricanes category 3 or greater. So that's a more active than normal season. They give some key reasons for that. The biggest one is that we're just in this period of more active hurricane seasons that started in 1995 and is supposed to last for about 40 years. And we're not out of that. The other thing is that we do have warmer sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean. And then there's, the El Nino effect. In this case, there's not an El Nino warmer in the Eastern Pacific, which causes storms to sort of break up a bit by having more wind shear at the upper levels in the Atlantic. The issue here is that we're in neutral territory. It's not La Nina, which actually increases the chances of hurricanes, but it's somewhere in between. So they say, yeah, there's going to be more as a result of that as well. So we'll see what happens. The problem locally is dealing with coronavirus, right. And that has got the state emergency managers and the local emergency managers preparing to determine on when they're going to have an evacuation, probably 10 hours in advance of when they normally do it. They normally try to start the evacuation on the coast about 54 hours before tropical storm force winds are expected. So now they're going to move that up to 65 to 69 hours. Mm-hmm. That's a big push because you really don't know how strong a storm will be or what its actual direction will be that far in advance. So that's going to be a real problem. And the reason they're doing that is coronavirus. And what they have to deal with is making sure that, especially in the New Orleans area, that they have enough time to get people on buses with proper masks, to get them checked for temperatures, separated if they do have high temperatures, and then at each step along the way to get them out to make sure that people are properly taken care of with social distancing and everything else.
All right. It just compounds a very difficult situation to begin with if you've got to evacuate. I mean, that's traumatic enough. Let me ask you this about storm surge. Wasn't there something else that's come out regarding storm surge?
Right. So one of the problems that the forecasters have been having is explaining to the public and even to emergency managers what the chances of storm surge occurring along parts, because the surge occurs in places different from where the storm is going in a lot of cases. So they come up with these new maps, which are largely show where storm surge can be here red, and it shows basically numbers for the heights above ground. Makes it easier.
Well, it's June 1, we just sort of dread it when this comes, the beginning of the hurricane season, and then with COVID on top of it, it definitely gives us a little bit more anxiety. Hopefully they'll just stay away from us. This is what we're all praying for.
The thing is that people today should have plans in place on what they're going to do, and should rely on friends to find places outside the area to evacuate to, because it's unclear whether there are going to be hotel rooms or shelter spaces available for everybody.
Right. Yeah, well, it certainly is a bit disheartening when you hear that it's above normal hurricane season. Normal is bad enough, to hear it above normal. Okay, Mark, thanks a lot. Errol, over to you. Our tourism industry, which is so important to the economy in the city of New Orleans, is really taking a hit.
Yeah, and you see from this conversation the kind of problems we have, that we tend to be a city, that attracts a lot of big events like conventions and sports events. All the conventions are canceled. There's no conventions. All the concerts. Now we see, Saints games and Pelican games not likely having people. And so even if people want to come to New Orleans, and then of course all of the fall festivals were canceled, which really caused some hard feelings with some of the people in the tourism development industry. And so even if people come, there's not a lot to do. And New Orleans is a city that usually has a lot to do. So imagine other cities, what they're like. So it's a little bit discouraging in terms of traveling. Flying is a little bit more difficult. Everything is disappointing, and the tourism is really, really down. And tourism supports. Some people put down tourism as being it's just it's just an imitation, but it really supports your culture. I mean, it's tourism it really supports the museum and the fine restaurants. I mean, locals cannot support all the culturally significant things that a community has. You need that rush of tourists also. And so without them, you have a problem. But I think a really operative phrase this year is going to be staycations. A lot of people are promoting the idea that if you live in the region, stay within the area and just come. And if you live anywhere like 300 miles around here and you want to think about where can I go to vacation, and you look at all the communities, you go Birmingham, Mobile, Atlanta, New Orleans. I mean, New Orleans becomes the place where you want to go. So the one good bit of news is that this is probably the best sale that there is, not only in the region, but in the country in terms of a staycation. So I think it's an idea that has to be promoted. And that's going to be your drive-in tourist. The person that's here for a long weekend. They're not as big as spenders as a convention here is. They're on some sort of a budget or something, but at least I think that's the base that they're trying to attract. And that's why we need the restaurants open. That's why we need music in the streets to give these people something to see and do once they get here.
Well, one thing that they'll be able to do come Memorial Day, which of course is coming up this Monday, is go to the National World War II Museum, which is going to be operating with, limited capacity, just like everything else, 25%. But that's certainly a place to check out, find out. I think you have to make reservations, which is something that for restaurants here in the city of New Orleans, it has to be reservations also. Even if you're a walk-up, be prepared to give your information. So tourism hurting, but hopefully we can do little by little to build it up again, right, E?
I think they're thinking it's going to take a couple of years to build it up to where it was. I mean, it was at a wonderful stage at some point. I mean, there were some weekends when the whole city was just really packed, and we're not going to be there for a while. But if we can at least get people to start rediscovering New Orleans, and if we can get events, if we get more activities, then we can be a slow recovery.
All right, E, thanks a lot. Gordon, let's go back on over to you. And the state released this week the names of nursing homes where there have been incidences of COVID infection and deaths. And for a while there, they weren't releasing those names. Why not?
Well, that's a good question that I don't think we have a really satisfactory answer to. Mm-hmm. I mean, they started out actually releasing the names of all these homes, not giving us specific data about how many cases or deaths were in each home, but identifying places that had problems, that had clusters. And then they stopped doing that and just started giving out the aggregate data, but not saying which nursing homes had the problems. So this was kind of a big deal to release it again. Right. And it showed some fairly shocking things. I mean, we knew that the pandemic was really hitting nursing homes the hardest, and it turns out 40% or more of the deaths have been in Louisiana nursing homes. It's really been concentrated in a small number or smallish number of homes that have had anywhere from 10 to 35 deaths in them, and it's really hollowed out some of these. I mean, these are typically places where there might be 100 residents mm-hmm. or a little over 100. So it's really taken just a massive toll, and I think the reasons are sort of obvious. I guess you have a vulnerable population, and you have oftentimes these people are dining together. There's a lot of interaction. They're fairly dense. It's a place where a virus can be passed easily. And then you have staff members going from room to room and also going back home at night, so potentially bringing the virus in. But I think that in the end, we're gonna when they look back on this and all the we try to figure out what went wrong with everything, we're going to say that we really blew it with nursing homes, and there should have been much more widespread testing early on. They were only testing people who were symptomatic, and now there's much more of a push to test everybody, including staffers, whether they have symptoms or not. But it's too late for a lot of people, unfortunately.
What is the state doing? Is it beefing up requirements? Is it checking on nursing homes more? What are they doing? Anything?
So they are. I mean, part of it is just there's a lot more testing available now, but they've changed the policy to push for mass testing. And when nursing homes are saying that they can't do it, the state says they're going to send in like strike teams to help them do that. I mean, there are quality issues with a lot of nursing homes too, which is going to be another thing that we've looked at a little bit and will continue to. But some of these nursing homes are poorly staffed and poorly run, and perhaps aren't doing a great job with just basic safety practices and infection protocols and that kind of thing.
Hey, Gordon, don't they account for what, 41% of the deaths statewide?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that number's been going up steadily too. So yeah, and that doesn't even account for senior homes, assisted living places that are not nursing homes, which is there's another big chunk of deaths in those places. So.
One thing that I've heard is people who have family in the nursing homes, they're not being told the truth in many instances. So is the state trying to look into that? Answer quickly, because we're about out of time.
I think a lot of people are frustrated at the level of information they've been getting. Yeah, it's been very vague. We've been told by a lot of family members.
Yeah, I've heard that too. All right, Gordon. All right, guys, we're going to wrap this up right now. There's other news happening out there. E, tell us about it.
Well, to try to encourage tourists, the airlines are being very diligent about promoting their safety precautions, including, I know, Delta and Southwest has put out long statements. Everybody's got to wear a mask, 60% occupancy, and you got to bring your own food and drink.
Okay. Mark?
Yeah, so we have a story that went up this afternoon that says that basically the state's wetlands are gone, that they are going to disappear either in 50 years or in a couple of hundred years. And the difference is whether or not something can be done rather rapidly about reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere, which there doesn't seem to be any real push to get done at the moment.
Mitigation isn't going to help at all? I mean, there's so many land building projects out there.
Mitigation looks like it can help in the short term for slowing things down so that we at least have enough time to figure out what to do with big cities like New Orleans.
Okay, thanks a lot. All right, Jeff, real quick for you.
Yeah, look, the New Orleans Saints and the state of Louisiana are looking for a company to buy the naming rights to the Superdome. The Superdome's contract with Mercedes-Benz runs out after this season. So somebody out there, Marcia, Errol, if y'all want to buy the naming rights, put your name on the Superdome.
We'll give it some thought. Gordon, real quick.
Burl Cain, longtime former warden of Angola Prison, has gotten a new job as the corrections commissioner for the state of Mississippi. Okay. Burl Cain left in some controversy, as you may recall.
Still close to home in Mississippi. All right, guys, thanks a lot for joining us from your various locations. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a wonderful, safe weekend.